my train of thought and then started. Okay, so I've put up some questions, some possible topics for whoever is going to facilitate, if that ends up being helpful to you as we walk through. So I want to kind of look at some of the things that I'm hoping that you'll end up talking about, because these are also some of the things that you will need to think about for preparing your mock for next class. So thinking about the emotions that you felt reading through chapter 19, in that time when baby Pashama is in the police station talking to Esta and Rahel. Why do you feel that way? Why does the author want you? What does the author want you to feel, and why? How does she make you feel the way that she does? Who is most responsible for the tragedy, and why? What purpose do you think Roy has in demonizing the characters she does? Who is most harmed by the tragedy, and why? And think about any thematic significance to that. And thinking about the relationship between characters' conflicts, motifs, and narrative voice, and how those kind of functions of the novel fit with genre, context, theme, and purpose. Thinking about the structure of the narrative, right, that we wait until these last 3 chapters to really understand the inner workings of the conflict. If there's any key passages, especially from the end, that you want to bring up, and then connections and comparisons to Dados to Things Fall Apart. Okay? So to remember or remind ourselves, I suppose, about what the structure is for our Socratic seminar, I am going to give you some points based on your contribution, so up to 5 points, a point per contribution. You get to start out with 3 if you are facilitating. So facilitator, again, your role is just to move us through discussion. If someone brings up a point and you want some clarification on that, you can prod them a little bit further. You can guide us through any of those possible topics, any of the topics that you've got in your chart. Is anyone willing to facilitate today? Yeah, thanks, Jolie. So Jolie's going to facilitate. We've got about 20-25 minutes. Ideally, if we're really cooking, then we can go further, so I'll keep time for you. I'm going to take notes about who talks, so that's what I'm doing when you see me writing. What was the other thing that I wanted to say to you? Something. The pressure. Yeah, you guys want to do this. So we'll go with about 20-25 minutes. Bring up what you need to bring up. Come back to the text, right? Remember that whatever your contributions you're making, they should be grounded in the text, and to the best extent possible that you're giving us page numbers and CDs. Questions?
Can I start anywhere in those?
You can start anywhere you want to. You can go anywhere you want to. You guys can move the discussion fluidly. Okay? Cool. You're on, Julie.
Okay. Let's start by talking about connections between androids and Things Fall Apart in this book. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I definitely think there's like a criticization of their societies in a way. With this one, it's towards the love laws. In androids, it's towards how the mentally ill people are treated and how people lack empathy. And then in Things Fall Apart, it's criticizing the Western community. So I think how they do that is similar through creating these characters that are protagonists and creating antagonists that we don't like. So creating those emotions with the reader, we see the criticization.
I think that an example when they're talking, when they kind of show that critique is on page 316, where it says, he tried to be rational. What's the worst thing that can happen? I could lose everything, my job, my family, my livelihood, everything. And that's when Velutha and Amu are together, and it's basically critiquing, like you were saying, the love laws, and showing that it develops these very likable characters. Well, Amu more or less, but Velutha at least is a very likable character, and then showing the pure motivations and the motivations of like just love, and then showing how he realizes the dangers that society places on him, which ends up killing him. The fact that it's I think that makes sense is pressure, but yeah.
The one big thing that I saw between the androids and
between like Amu and Belufa's like bad relationship, not bad, but like taboo relationship, and then like Rick and Rachel's, not Hell's, Rachel's relationship, and how like that caused conflict because they decided to be with each other, and it's one big tension that I saw.
I think the theme of putting blame on the innocent is in both this book and Things Fall Apart. Both books, they have a scapegoat where they put all their blame on, like the missionaries. Okonkwo puts all the blame for things changing. And then in this book, they have everything put on Belufa, and so he ends up dying because of that, and just how no one's taking responsibility for their actions.
And same with androids, because they're putting blame on the androids and seeking them out, killing them when, I mean, all they did was just escape bad treatment.
But I think in a way that I see that there's a theme that sort of everyone is at fault, and that in those books that we, for some reason, don't like Rick as a character. I personally didn't. And we see both the blame he puts on androids, but also his own faults in that. So I think sort of that theme of that everyone in some way is at fault. And with going back to this is when I couldn't find it, but when Esther says yes to the police's question about if Belufa was.
That's 302. Oh, right. Oh, yes.
So, well, that part of it, and you kind of see, like, he did have the choice to say no, but you see baby Katrana's like, kind of delusional attack on him, causing him.
I thought it was cool on 300 and 302, like you were saying, Sky. So on 300, it says, towards the bottom, 4 saucers stared back at her, fascinated by the story she was telling them. Then what happened? So it's kind of showing how baby's manipulating them. And then on 302, towards the middle, it says, in the years to come, they would replay this scene in their heads as children, as teenagers, as adults. Had they been deceived into doing what they did? Had they been tricked into condemnation? In a way, yes, but it wasn't as simple as that. They both knew they'd been given a choice. So it kind of goes into, I don't know whether it's focalization on Esta or Rahel or both of them right now, but just kind of talking about how they recognized later in life that even though they were children and they were innocent, they still knew what was going to, they knew something bad was going to happen to Belufa, and then deceived themselves into thinking it wasn't Belufa.
One similarity that I found between the protagonists of all 3 books was that each of them kind of has this sense of feeling like it's them against the world. And in this case, it's Esta and Rahel against the world. It says on page 4 that they thought of themselves together as me, and they were a rare breed of Siamese twins, physically separate but with joint identities. And in that sense, throughout the book, it kind of seems as though they become like a complete entity when they're together, but it's kind of them against the world. And that's similar to how, like, Okonkwo fights for himself and only for himself. And Rick kind of felt isolated in the emotions that he was feeling, and feeling as though he was the only one who felt empathy and, like,
I think another thing, like the theme that I've been tracking the most is that a loss of innocence leads to adulthood, and all 3 protagonists kind of experience a loss of innocence. Like Okonkwo is just living his happy little life, and the missionaries come, and then like Rick, he like starts to feel empathy for the androids, and then of course Rahel has to lose their innocence. And I think that
Building off of that, I think also even some of the minor characters contribute to that. Like, for example, Noye, well, kind of the opposite in which he felt depressed and then felt less so, but in a lot of them, and with the genre of Bildung's roman, we see a lot of the characters change and go from innocent to not innocent, or from living a kind of cushy life to having a lot of problems all at once, which is kind of with the tragedy versus what was the other one that has a very specific timeline. I can't think of what it is.
Anti-hero?
Yeah, those 2, like with Things Fall Apart, we're talking about how the characters change, and then this one with Bildung's roman, it's kind of in all of them we're watching a character change. It seems to be focused on the changes in the character and the cultural implications.
Going along with talking about innocence, I noticed that every sexual encounter throughout this book was described explicitly and kind of feel a little bit of discomfort, except for the encounter between Esther and Rahel. And the way it was described, you could almost still feel as though there was an element of innocence to it. And so does anyone have thoughts about that?
Well, I just kind of think it's really interesting in going into the love laws that like Western society has, and that the author is intentionally making like us and the person myself feel uncomfortable, and sort of kind of taking a step back and being open-minded towards like the definitions of love we have, and especially like in our society now, like gay-sex marriage and things like that, and how we justify certain things but disregard others. So I think it's really interesting how she did that, and I think it was very intentional to open everyone's eyes towards it.
And I think that's why she wrote it in English instead of in her native language. It's just to really hit at Western culture.
Because, well, I mean, sorry, but like because we like Felicia and sort of in there, we, during that whole time, like I personally was angry towards how Felicia was treated. And I was very upset. It's like, why can't they be together? And I think through Esther and Rahel's relationship, she shows kind of to the extent we are allowed to question that, if that makes sense. Like we are questioning why Indian society will not allow them to do that. And then when it goes to incest between twins, we're like, oh, that's not allowed. So it's kind of that.
One question that I have is like when they describe like them hooking up, they said on chapter it was chapter 20 page 311. They said the only thing that they shared that night, it wasn't happiness, it was grief. So does that mean that they were ashamed of what they did because of love laws, or were they sharing each other's pain because of everything?
I think they were sharing each other's pain, because it talks all through the book how they feel like how Rahel felt like molestation from the orange drink man, even though she wasn't there, and they just identify with each other and they know how they feel. And so I think the reason that they feel so connected to each other is because they're the only people in the world who really understand each other. And so I think that grief is also what led to their love for each other.
I think they also feel like ashamed though, because then in the next line it says like just the diction kind of says, once again they broke the love laws, kind of saying like they're doing it again. So I feel like they're kind of ashamed. So they're not like, they can't reach like their full happiness that they want.
So I think that another, like Mike was saying, is kind of how they how they only understand each other. Camille, sorry. I feel like that was also kind of a connection with androids and empathy. I was marking a lot because we have a lot of stuff that's kind of twin telepathy, and so I felt that in this one they're kind of showing that tragedy develops empathy, or experiencing something either traumatic or just very important in your life can develop that sort of.
One connection that I made that I haven't heard anybody brought up is the narrative voice and vocalization switches, especially seen in Things Fall Apart and God of Small Things. And I kind of took it as they were used to like emphasize the thought of different characters, because there was a third person omniscient narrator for both of these texts. I just found that interesting. Yeah.
Well, in God of Small Things, most of the vocalization is around Rahel and what she writes. I mean, what she speaks. And I'd always thought that Rahel was actually the voice of the author, Roy, and how she translates her experiences during both 1969 and 1963 through like Rahel's own way of telling the story. And I also noticed that also in Things Fall Apart, there's a lot of vocalization around Okonkwo where he's like, poor me, why do all these bad things happen to me? And it kind of like shows how Okonkwo is very quick to place the blame on anyone.
I think in androids for Rick, they also show like his feelings a lot. They focus on how he feels towards androids, and then his wife, and like it's kind of focused on the path he takes through his feelings stuff.
I think sometimes they also use separate characters to show, especially to develop genre and like the cultural and contextual changes. For example, in The God Rahel and Estha, they have their own viewpoint, which is used a lot, which is very, very different than, for example, Mamachi's, who she's been raised in this culture, and so you see the more impressionable pure state, or Isidore and Rick in Androids, or Nwoye and Okonkwo. I just feel like in most of them there's kind of a character that is seen as innocent and not entirely within society, kind of an outsider, and then there's one who's a bit more shaped by the society, and I think that the authors use that in order to critique and also explain in positive ways the culture that they're referring to, or dystopia. I guess it's not
I always thought that the authors of all three of the books use that kaleidoscope narrative to kind of like contrast, as you said, between the two ideologies of the characters in the books, and especially in Things Fall Apart, you can see the differences between Okonkwo, who's still very like attached to his own culture, whereas Nwoye is more open to the missionaries. And in Androids, you can see like the contrast between Rick and Isidore, and how they see other people, especially their views on what is considered human and who we should treat with sympathy. And in God of Small Things, it was very much cultural differences.
So going along with discussing the characters, let's move into talking about how the characters affect the genre context of the purpose and how the author uses the characters to demonstrate that.
I feel like as a baby Kuchama, like she puts a really big connection between herself, the missionaries, and Things Fall Apart, and also maybe Mercer in Shadows, and how like their purpose is to kind of spotlight this religion, or like the idea of religion, and how yet they're religious and supposed to be pure, they end up being sort of the antagonist of their story and sort of manipulate the protagonist into believing things that are not truly pure but added demonic and stuff. And so I believe each author uses them good.
One of the actually for connections, it's one of the themes that I have is about religious, like religion used for deception, and I feel that that's kind of a statement that all of the authors are making, is that it can be used to manipulate people. And in Things Fall Apart, I thought that was interesting because although it's an autoethnography and kind of Baibu, it's still not saying the missionaries were manipulative and bad, but this was an entirely positive religion that they already had. It's not doing that either, but it was just showing that with the wrong mindset and with the wrong people in charge, society can use religion negatively to just either brainwash or guilt them. For example, there's a part where on page 300 where Baby says something to, I think it's either Rahel, Esther, or both. She says, "It's the worst thing that anyone can ever do. Even God doesn't forgive that. You know that, don't you?" So she's kind of using religion and what God might think of them to guilt them further beyond just what they're already feeling and the fact that their Valuta is at risk of, and their mom.
I think it's also, just going back to Baby Kochama, important to recognize her manipulativeness and how I really think that she spurs on the conflict and makes it into more than it is, with her manipulation of the twins and getting them to say yes to the officer's question and to say that it was Valuta, and also her manipulation of Mamachi. I don't know the exact page, but when Mamachi is confronting Valuta, it talks about how her rage is spurred on by actually Baby Kochama's rage, and how she just has this rage inside of her that she, for some reason, wants to get out, and she is just so manipulative.
She reminds me of like in like the Disney fairy tales, like random evil stepmother that's like really angry for no reason, and like you can't explain why she's angry, but she's there to drive the plot because nobody loves her.
No,
Now, do you think that that would be the reason? Because I question every time. Like, I really wonder why she acts that way.
Well,
Like,
some groups it's like, Father Mulligan, like maybe it's because she didn't get his love. But then there's some things where I'm just like, I think you're just mean because the author made you mean.
I
Like,
think it's
Also, there's a theme I've noticed in both of a pressure to carry on a tradition. And I think that also could be her driving force of being so mean and so rude, is that she wants to keep this conservative tradition going. And she wants India, or her society, to stay the same.
Well, especially for baby Kochama, she wants to perpetuate the tradition because she feels like she won't be worth anything if suddenly this caste system is out of place. And suddenly what separates her from other people, and she had always used this to give herself more self-esteem. And so I think that's a huge theme throughout all the books, is how a lot of people either justify corrupt religions or corrupt moralities in order to build up their self-esteem. Like the humans in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, they like to hold themselves above the androids and to build up their self-esteem. And then in Things Fall Apart, it was definitely near the end of the book they talked about the people who didn't have a lot of status were joining the missionaries. And so Ocampo was like, oh well, because I have more status, I'm obviously better than them. So there's this whole thing about using traditional status in order to boost self-esteem.
Well,
That's
I
ironic
kind of
'cause
am confused about that because I hope that she does become, going back to what Micah said and the end of what you said, Baby Kachama does become a nun, which is kind of outside of the traditions in her society. So I'm just.
But wasn't she kind of punished for that by not actually, so it just drove her further to believe those things, because once she broke out of that mold, it didn't work well for her. So wouldn't that just make her feel more that way and make her more angry?
What I kind of noticed throughout the description of her character is that it seems as though she's kind of grasping for control and for power in everything that she does. Like in becoming a nun, she's trying to manipulate Father Mulligan into falling in love with her, and she manipulates the twins, and she's using her manipulation to try to grasp for control.
And I think the author used a manipulation and to show her as rude by the author uses italics a lot in almost every single line that Baby Chama says. I just think that really shows her tone when she speaks.
So Alana, did you want to say something? You raised your hand a while ago.
I was just thinking that the theme of identity that we've kind of seen in a lot of the books ties into with the things is Baby Kachama seems to have shaped her identity around the caste system, and kind of Ocampo shaped his identity around the manliness and the some masculinity of his society. And so once people started focusing on missionaries who were still manly, but nobody really cares anymore. And
I don't see Baby as somebody who's preserving tradition, but more preserving herself. And through that, she's using the caste system and traditional values as a scapegoat in order to be well, you're ruining this Indian culture. It's your fault. But it's more of them ruining her. That's why she's saying it.
I saw no one brought up how Baby Kochama had a weird split personality when she referred to herself, especially when the narrative was focalized around her. There was Maria Kochu, and I think that's how you pronounce it, or Kocho, whatever. And then Baby Kochama, it's because she sees herself presented much differently than she actually is. So she's extremely delusional about how much power she holds. And so I just thought that was interesting.
I had a question about page 320. The spider, I was wondering what you guys thought it symbolized, and if that could be connected to when they talk about animals